This program is produced using the resources of Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Learn more at publicmedianet.org.
Welcome to Connecting Communities, a podcast with the Kalamazoo Earth Day Committee and the Public Media Network. Today we have a great team from the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council. Your hosts, myself, David Benak, and Joe Byers. And I will let our guests introduce themselves.
Oh, Ryan Koziatek with the Kalamazoo Nature Center, Stewardship Director.
Michele Richards, Michigan Army National Guard, Natural Resources and Wildland Fire Program Manager, and Secretary, seemingly forever, of the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council.
Dave Brown, Stewardship and Fire Manager, Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy, and the current Vice Chair for Michigan Prescribed Fire Council.
All right.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us what Michigan Prescribed Fire Council is and their function?
Sure. So
You're lucky you
it's
got
been
one of the
around-
founding members.
Right, it's been around for 26 years. It was originally founded with a group of people from different agencies who did prescribed fire in Michigan as a means to promote the safe use of prescribed fire, do more education, outreach, have people understand what it is on the landscape, and support each other in this thing that 25 years ago still was pretty controversial. Sometimes it's controversial now, but we've expanded quite a bit in those years. It used to be Southern Michigan Prescribed Fire Council, and then we voted in 2004 to make it statewide. And we do trainings and outreach activities and all kinds of stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we get going along. But so outreach, education, and promoting prescribed fire.
Before we get into what you're specifically doing, one of the things you mentioned, I'd like you to talk about. So I've done work with forest history, and so my engagement with the history of fire, as a management tool, very big controversy from the late 70s into 2000s or so. Where is the status of fire as a management tool in the landscape today, and how do you deal with that public controversy?
Love-hate relationship with Smokey the Bear. So I'll pitch this one if you're good with that.
Yeah.
So fire was part of the landscape long before colonialization, and there's some really great researchers around the whole country doing what they call pyrodendrochronology. Maybe that's what you're referring to. And so they take tree rings and they analyze when burns went through the landscape, and they can tell by the dates of the trees when fire went through. And they found people always have this perception that it was lightning. Much more of the science keeps backing up that it was human ignited fire. We have used, as humans, fire on our landscapes for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. When white folks colonialized the country, we took fire away because we were scared of it, and almost all of the systems in the U.S. co-evolved both with fire and with beaver. I had to throw that one in for you. But forever, fire's been here, and when we took it out, mesification happens. So the species composition changes.
In case people don't, mesification, what is that?
It goes from a xeric landscape, meaning dry, to a partially wet, partially dry landscape. And we get enough rain here in our state that it'll go. I'm not supposed to talk so much the fire ecology because I know you guys are going to do that a little bit later.
Yeah, think soil building in those mesic conditions versus more of a nutrient-poor state with less organics building up.
And our soils are all sand, really. Most of the soils in Michigan, except if they had prairie on them, and they've got really nice, deep, organic soils. But we took most of that away and farmed it. So we're trying to reintroduce fire on the landscape because the things that were here originally were adapted to fire and need fire, and it keeps out the things that are not adapted to fire. And the good news for us, because I also do work in climate science, is that the future conditions in 50 and 100 years will still match the soils that we have here in Michigan. So we'll be able to not have to do some of the transitions where in other places they're going to have to be like, we need maple trees from South Carolina to put into Vermont to be able to adapt to the changes that we're expecting to be here in our state. So lucky for us, what we're doing by restoring oak ecosystems and prairies and the pine systems in the north will work in the face of the scenarios that we're expecting here.
You mentioned 1970 as being kind of like a pinch point for when it was controversial, but through the fire dendrochronology studies that they've had, looking at a halt in fires, natural human-caused fires in the mid-1800s. So the whole, I mean, at a time that we were making fire illegal. So for the thousands of years, right, since the glaciers had receded, knowing that fire's been on the landscape, largely likely because of humans for that, this is a lesson that has taken 200 years to learn from the people who halted.
Yeah, is with the that controversy, is my understanding that's right around when different types of land managers started trying to reintroduce fire. And that creates the controversy because
Gotcha.
everybody before agreed it was bad, and then all of a sudden the same, in my research, the same foresters who one year are saying don't burn anything, the next year they're coming back and intentionally setting fire to the woods.
What are you people doing? Yeah, it is definitely terrifying. And, you know, depending on where it is, right, California has a lot of fuels because they have long summers. Florida does too, but Florida has maintained their fire regime way better than the West has. So we see those wildfires out west and we're like, oh my God, you're going to light a fire and that's what's going to happen. That's not what happens here in Michigan. Like, you know, when we go out and try to burn our units that we're working in, we drag a lot of drip torch fuel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a constant back and forth through that unit trying to get that fire to go because we have lost so much of the fuels that would ordinarily carry the fire, and like maple leaves don't carry it, but oak leaves will, right? So it's a lot of work to get it to go. So it doesn't look like those crazy big flame heights and the pines torching out and all of that stuff when we do it here in Michigan.
Well, so let's turn it to some of what you're doing. Started in '99, from what I saw. So since 1999, have you seen a difference in the public's acceptance of what you're doing, and how are you engaging to promote that?
I think I haven't been around that long in the fire community, but I'm going to throw out sometimes it's an off-the-cuff answer, but it depends. I think the more people see it happening in a responsible, safe way that's being educated about, and the burn managers are doing the legwork beforehand, door knocking, putting out door hangers, communicating, doing mailings. Those are all things that we try to do as much as we can. And it's like anything. The more we can communicate, the better off we will be when it actually happens. Like, you're gonna see smoke. Smoke's okay for like a day, as opposed to seeing smoke for 6 months, 3 months. There's just like we're doing right now, like getting out there and telling people like there's gonna be some smoke. It's okay. We know what we're doing. We're highly trained. In fact, this is like, of all of the things that we dabble in, fire community is probably one of the most highly qualified group of people who stay on top of their skills. It's impressive to watch, actually. But I think, yeah, the comms to get out and get in front of things.
It's regional too, right? Like, so southern Michigan is not as scary for people because, again, the fire behavior is way quieter. Northern lower, Mac Lake happened in 1980, and everybody's like, no, you know, and that was a lost prescribed fire. It wasn't just a, you know, lightning strike and golly, there was a wildfire.
But up in that area, so I'm from Alpena, so and you grew up in you know, timber communities.
Yep.
There's still a living memory of forest fires. Yeah, my grandparents tell me about like just out of control, terrifying fires. So it's not that far away in some places.
And those are the areas where if you don't burn it regularly, that's what happens. You know, the Camp Grayling is up north. It's not under my jurisdiction, but like I have concerns. The fuel buildup in those units is huge. There's incendiaries firing. Like there's going to, you know, if we don't burn it, if we don't take the fuel out of that system on a regular basis, then you get wildfires and you get devastating behavior. If you burn it every 3 to 5 years and you take out all the stuff that's in the understory, you'll never get that crazy fire behavior.
Yeah, I think fire suppression, buildup of unburned fuel. I mean, anything in that system is going to be that fuel. And over time, more of a chance of that catastrophic type wildfires going through.
Yeah, what Dave was saying about the training, you know, it's not just a bunch of yahoos going out and throwing matches on the ground. Though once you do it, you will always want to do it.
I want to come watch.
But you are welcome to come
welcome.
watch. Yeah, we have public information officers on many of our fires, and you know we're happy to have people come out and witness it because it helps get the word out, right? But we all train. Like you know, there's two sides. If there's the agency side, which is this crazy thing called Incident Qualification System and the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. From terrible fires that killed people, they want to make sure people do fire safely. And then we have, you know, the not-for-profit side and the other organizations. Michigan is lucky we have a certified prescribed burn manager law on the books that is now being implemented. So we do a lot of training. Like we do a lot of planning. Like you know, there's a huge plan written for every unit that we do that says, here's the weather that's the parameter, and here's the fuels that are going to be in, and here's the resources we're going to have, the people and the equipment and all of that stuff. And if the parameters for that day don't line up, Ryan and I look at the weather every day, right, Ryan?
That's right.
Because it's very contingent upon those conditions. So, but
Even in the winter, yeah.
even in the winter.
And back to Dave's point too about that, you know, person-to-person connection. It's not just even with the, you know, people in the neighborhood, but it's those who are signing off on your burn plan. So it could be, you know, the fire chief in the township or the city, municipality. You know, the layers of the discussions that we have amongst the fire community heavily are on how are you communicating about your fires? How are you, you know, bringing people into that space? We're doing things called burn and learns where people can come out, you know, finding a fire that has a public information officer, keeping people safe, but are able to interpret that experience through, you know, either listening on the radio or watching it happen and having somebody say, it's going to be all right.
And it's interesting because I work in all 9 counties of Southwest Michigan. That's our service area. And there are some places that we have burned for a long time that it's understood, people are used to it. Then we get a new preserve somewhere and we bring fire in after doing some management, and those first entry fires are, I've learned the hard way of like, okay, we need to go really spend man hours, human hours, knocking on doors and talking to people way beforehand, because we've been bitten by it, where it's like, oh yeah, let's go burn it. Okay, now we got neighbors, and we need to, you know, we didn't do our due diligence, and now we do. And again, a learning effort that I think we've all had those learning opportunities, we'll say, on our fires, and I think that's one thing. Again, like that's part of the training as well, right? Like we're constantly working to do better, and show a good face for what fire can be in Michigan.
You mentioned
Prescribed fire.
looking for passion, right? Yes, prescribed. Not just crazy fire.
Yeah.
The thing that happened for me, I just posted about this recently, right? I worked for the Nature Center a long, long time ago, and I was working on the Asylum Lake assessment, and I read this paper on fire in the oak openings in Ohio, and I had printed it off, and I found it as I was going through my office. I printed it in 2000, and I was like, this would be good for Asylum Lake. and the notes to myself, I'm like, huh. And then, a couple years later, I started working for Michigan Army National Guard and got connected with the right person and started doing the fires. And once you see what it does on the landscape and the efficiency of the tool, rather than going in and sending people in with saws and pesticide and all that good stuff to manage invasive species and the things that we don't want there, we're going in there with this thing that goes through and it does the work, and we make sure it's in the box, and then we go back the next year and like, look, that plant came back. Look, that animal came back. We've actually had species that were considered extirpated in the county show back up in our burn units because the habitat is there again. So it's a really powerful tool. I'm a geologist in my original training with some biology thrown in and in environmental studies, and like, I'm sold, right? Like, I want these habitats to be in a good place and healthy, and here's this thing, and you do it, and then the history actually also supports it. So it's, and the community that you build, right? Like, you guys have both sort of mentioned that. Like, if you're on a fire with somebody and you can trust them, they've got your back in anything. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, so the tools, or you were saying with the fire, how the tools, clear out things that you don't necessarily want, but bringing back things. So one of the things you've mentioned oak openings and oak savannas a couple of times, and they are like the most biodiverse spaces, like from the Midwest down through, where they originally were. So that's, tell us more about some of the things that you've seen come back after a burn.
Do you guys want to? I'm
Well,
dominating, so.
I can start by helping to set that up too. And we talk about fire being a tool, but the reason why it is there is because it's a disturbance mechanism, and usually we think of disturbances as very negative, right? It's a change that either we weren't expecting or don't want. And like this kind of pretend like we like a stasis, right, where everything feels comfortable and the same. So to talk about things like a beaver shifted the landscape because there were flooding areas, and sometimes they can seem like something that we're not necessarily friendly to what we're trying to do as we set up our roads and infrastructures and things like that. But what fire does in this case is a disturbance. These habitats you mentioned, like the savannas or the prairies, they're known as like early successional habitats. And so succession is like if you go from a prairie to kind of a closed canopy forest, to say simply, without fire there working through and disturbing the landscape, then you get that transition. So all of a sudden, all of the plants that relied on more of an open canopy, more sunlight as a resource, they can't make it in that closed canopy system. But they've got a lot of amazing attributes, being able to kind of hide out in the soil for a while.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think one of the things, a lot of our burn units are still pretty young in restoration at this point. So one thing that we're actively working on is doing better monitoring of our units, whether we're burning them or not. But fire being one of the most effective disturbance tools we can use. I mean, we can use a lot of other things, but also we don't have things that the landscape had. We don't have bison anymore. We don't have elk here anymore. So like those are things that would have also been disturbance factors and potentially driven some of the herbaceous species in the region as well with fire in tandem. And one of the things that I think is really nice to walk through a ecosystem that's been burned multiple times, you start to see the understory pop back to life. It's like fireworks sometimes. Like you see forbs, you see tree regeneration, you see grasses and sedges, you see these things, and then you see wildlife actively using it and interacting with it, whereas before maybe they weren't there. Maybe the food source wasn't there that they like. I mean, you talk about deer hunters with mast deers with acorns and whatnot, but those critters also like savanna-like habitats, right? Like they like to be able to see through the areas to see the predator that may or may not be there. And so do we. I mean, we like that landscape in one way or another as well, freeing up those sight lines. So there's a lot of different aspects that come to savannas and opening light in these systems. There's a lot of other nuance that goes along with it as well, but that's, I don't know. There's nothing better than fireworks after a burn, I think. Like the forbs that come up.
Yeah. So Virginia flax is one of the plants that showed back up at Fort Custer after we did some burning.
I was gonna say, so what you're saying is great, but let's drill it down and like, what is one case in your experience that just made you excited because it worked so well?
Right, so the 3 species that came back that we know of for sure, Virginia flax, the king rail, which is a bird, and the tiger spike-tailed dragonfly, all considered extirpated from Kalamazoo County, except for maybe the plant. Certainly wasn't at Fort Custer. When we run fire through those systems, like Dave said, it creates the habitat. Those animals want to come back. They've got the food source or the nesting place or the nectaring species that they needed. An interesting fight has been in those savannas. We have a barrens and a Mesic Prairie at Fort Custer. We've done so much management in it, and fire got pulled out of the system for some years because of politics and people being resistant to fire in my organization, and it all grew back into woodies. So, we've gone back in, bless Kansie's heart, with their crews and like cut stuff out and burned it some more and burn it some more. One of the lessons we've learned is don't do a first entry unless you can go back in the next year and probably the year after that, and hopefully in 2 years after that, 3rd year.
Why?
Because if you don't keep putting fire through it, it turns back into the mesified, or lots of invasives will show up, or even the natives, like sassafras freaked out in our barrens because we didn't put fire back through it. So there's this, and again, it's a native species, but it's clonal, and boom, there's a whole bunch of sassafras.
We have some areas that have too much oak regeneration happening in some of the areas where it's like, okay, it's an oak savanna or oak barrens, and it's, we're supposed to have light, and all of a sudden there's 30 black oaks per square foot, and it's like, okay, we got to do something about that, and fire would eventually knock that out too. I don't know. I think I'm trying to think of a time for your question.
I think that, like, we talked about it a little bit beforehand, because you're going to have Mitch and Jesse and Mary on, and those 3 will be able to manage that very well, especially Jesse. And we were going to try to do more of the operational side of fire with you all, so like what it takes to put a fire on the ground. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do want to touch on what Dave said too. That's been kind of an important lesson. So it doesn't have to be a long time since something has been there for you to kind of see that, the result of an absence of fire. So Michelle mentioned the sassafras. I've got my own examples too, where we were able to make a lot of gains at some point. Maybe there was a grant out there that allowed a certain amount of funding that allowed us to get in there and bring back some of that habitat. And when that goes away, and then you have to step out of the system, and it really doesn't take, it can take just 2 to 3 years for something to go back to where you started, and just the amount of importance of as a land manager, as a person building a relationship with those environments. It's really taught myself that it's not a date. We got to make these long-term commitments with these spaces, and that's when we learn these really deep, lessons that kind of comes from out of that too. So some of it is like we've got specific examples, but a lot of it is just really implied by the lessons that we've learned about keeping that in.
There's a reason stewardship is in our job titles. Like, stewardship is what we do. We steward the landscape. We are here to be the current stewards of that ecosystem, of where we're working, that special place that we're a part of. And so it's like, we're not the first stewards, we're not the last stewards either. So we're the ones that to set the next stewards up for success as well, whoever that may be.
And if we're learning anything right now, it's probably something that has been lost. to some
Yeah,
degree.
yeah,
right?
totally.
So when we want to do fire, right? Like there's, I mentioned earlier, there's a burn plan, and there's lots of pieces of that burn plan that go into it. There's the weather prescription, there's the people, the equipment, the qualifications depending upon who's doing the fire, and you know it requires engines. So sometimes we have big old Type 6 fire engines that are real. They look like the fire engine maybe that you see at the fire department, like a pickup truck with a big pump on the back end of it. Sometimes they're little all-terrain vehicles with a 50-gallon pump on the back end of it that's far more.
Or it's a quad with a 30-gallon tank on the back. Like, yeah. Or a person with a backpack full of water.
Right. We have very heavy, very torturous devices called backpack sprayers. His predecessor made everybody wear one, of which I was like, that's not nice. Not everybody has to carry the load. We use hand tools a lot, right? So we'll write a plan for a unit. We pull it, we make a map, we say, this is the place that we're going to burn. We have an ignition pattern that we use for each one of those fires. Each different kinds of ignitions do have different effects inside that unit that you are burning. Sometimes we ring it and then we go ahead and go back inside and light on the inside, depending if it's big or if the fuels are not contiguous. And we can do smoke management too, right? Like we know from prescribed fire practitioners as well as the bigger community at large, smoke is what's going to anger our neighbors, and it's the thing that's going to have fire be taken away from us. So we're very conscientious about where that smoke's going. There's winds on the ground level where we're standing, and then there's 20-foot winds, which sometimes are the opposite direction of the wind down below. And then relative humidity impacts the amount of moisture that's in that plant and whether or not it's flammable. There are all kinds of pieces of software, some better than others, that provide you the understanding of probably what that fuel is going to do given the conditions that you've got outside. So we do a ton of training to understand how the fire is going to behave when we put it on the ground so that we make sure that it's as safe as possible, because we don't want to upset the neighbors and lose the tool that we value.
So that's how and when you do a fire. How do you choose which place to put it?
That's a very, very nuanced question.
Well, the question's not, the answer is.
Well, yeah, that too. It all starts with what was there historically, at least for a lot of the ecosystems we work in, whether it's a remnant site that maybe didn't get tilled or tilled, farmed, or logged, soil disturbance wise. We have some sites that, the seed bank comes back and it's amazing. We have some sites that were tilled into kind of an oblivion. And so then they're full on restorations and, what are our goals there? What are the resources that are available to not just fire, but like Ryan talked about follow-up and going back to the site, and it's like, do we have the human and fiscal resources to actually go back and do that work? So like making sure we can follow up. And did we prep the site? Is it ready for it? Is it too mesified? Is it too, do we need to actually go in and cut out red maples in the upland, because red maples are not an upland species. They're technically a wetland species, and they have come up into our oak systems and started to cool the forest floor. So have we made the unit ready for fire as well? I try to take a little bit of a holistic approach. I'm like, what plants are there? As simply as looking at the unit.
High quality natural communities is where we've sort of put the bang for our buck at Custer, right? So there's these places that Michigan Natural Features Inventory has identified as places that are in decent enough shape to represent what those places looked like historically, and all but one that we have at Custer are fire adapted. So we keep the fire out of the seeps, but every place else, we don't have to do a lot of work to do that because the soils and the plants don't make the fire go there anyways. But everywhere else needs the fire. We were talking about novel ecosystems a little bit which is a jaded term for some people, but also in climate change, probably we have to think about it. Like, those are generally not very conducive to fire because those plants aren't adapted to it. Our restoration buck, in my opinion, and I think we share this, is that you go into those high quality places, you do the work, you hope that maybe it shoves it out foot by foot or whatever every time you go and do a little bit more work, and then hopefully you're impacting the places outside that boundary. But those are generally the ones that we focus on. And I think that's pretty standard.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it always comes back to also, like, again, like, do we have the money to do it there? Unfortunately, that's sometimes where it comes back to.
Yep.
I don't know, it's hard as a human to look at some of our places and go, I'd really like to work in this spot. But also, these people that are much smarter than me have helped identify these areas that are really, really nice and intact. And we need to really double down there. But then I have to walk right by this one section that I'd really like to work in every day. But it's learning to, again, keep it in the box a little bit, in a different term of like keeping the fire in the box, but like keeping our human expectations in the box of like working our way outward.
Yeah, it's in the places that have missed fire. Right? It's fire is
And that
more,
we still have a
is more
chance
than just a
in.
chemical
Right.
process, right? The land has a relationship with fire, and so it's. Mm-hmm.
What's the big and small size of plots that you manage with fire?
We've done everything from an acre to 800 acres in southern Michigan. And, I have colleagues across country who do this at National Guard installations, and they'd be, yeah, we did 5,000 acres today. We don't really have that here. But in southern Michigan, I think probably 800 is the top of the...
Yeah, it can be scaled. One of the things that limits that too is the, habitat loss has been a big thing for why some of these places aren't there. Some of that is because of fire suppression, but another of that is because, well, there used to be prairies, there's now
fragmentation.
right.
Yeah.
settler landscapes in those areas, and where large landscape fires would have been the norm in some of these spaces, guided by some of the natural barriers, streams, and places that don't burn very well. Now we got to keep things in a very tight box, and it's what we're more limited by. So we've got to be flexible, be able to scale it from a garden to something like 800 acres.
There's day of decisions too, and during our burn week last year, we were going to do a unit that the Nature Center had, and Ryan was like, I don't know if we should do that or not because weather and smoke and there's boundaries, and we got there and we're like, okay, we're going to keep it to this boundary instead of this boundary because that other boundary was not in a place that would be safe to do the burn. So there's decisions the day of, the weather has to be right, all that good stuff, and then there's the decisions on an annual basis where we sit down and be like, okay, which units are we going to hit this year if we can, if all of the stars align and the circumstances provide us the capacity to get that fire done.
Also decisions mid-burn too.
Right.
We've shut burns down mid-burn sometimes.
Yes, we have.
And I think that's an important thing for people to understand is like, we'll shut them down if we need to. When we see weather patterns change, see the smoke doing things we don't want it to, even social problems have shut some down. So, but yeah.
Does the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council only work with institutional and public property, or do you work with private landowners as well?
We try to encourage private landowner burning. The Certified Prescribed Burn Manager program is going to help us get farther in that, I think. They're a hard audience to get to. We've spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. We go to them as much as we can, right? So conservation districts, working with NRCS, Pheasants Forever, Wild Turkey Federation, they have their hands more, the National Deer Association, like they have their hands more on the private land piece. We certainly encourage it, and we've offered training to private landowner groups. as you asked, like the historically piece, like NRCS is getting better at opening their arms to fire too. There's the Conservation Reserve Program, which has been kind of this frustrating place for a lot of people who are in it over the decades because they're like, well, here, plant all this prairie stuff in your riparian buffer zones. However, you can't actually spend any of our money on burning it. So, but you should burn it, but we're not going to help you burn it because you have to have an NWCG certified burn boss to do the burn. So those doors are starting to open better now. And yes, we want private landowner engagement and activity, and we want to help them do it safely. So it is a mission for sure.
Yeah, we've, so the Nature Center does some for hire work out there, and we were at a point helping landowners do some burns on their in the backyards, whatever they needed to work with, wetland backyard. But there's a capacity issue. There's certainly more out there that needs to be done than can be done by the people who are currently doing it. Yeah. So the biggest goal that we have is finding it, those different ways to bring people into that space to learn how to do so safely. And yeah, that's my favorite thing is bringing somebody in there. We've got to work with where we currently are to keep fire safe and to keep people happy and people signing off on our burn plans by jumping through all of the training hoops and the acronym training certifications and the things that allow us to get there now. We're finding ways to safely lower that bar and bring more people into that fire community.
Is there a burn season for the work you do?
When there's not snow on the ground.
Every day's a burn day.
I can hear Jack in the back of my head right now. Yeah.
That's it. So it depends on what your objectives are, essentially for that. So at a certain point, it was doing it only during the dormant seasons where we weren't harming as many things as we were told we were going to be harming. But then the plant community doesn't respond in a way that's beneficial to get some of those objectives. So
might respond in a negative way outside of our management goals.
Exactly. So Dave mentioned forbs or the wildflowers in there, and you can decrease the wildflowers you have in a plot and increase the grasses that you have in a plot, which can be more aggressive based on the time of year that you burn. And burning more in the dormant season leads to more of the grasses showing up, which is cascading effects on not being good for ground nesting birds and things like that too. So
we have fought fights, right? Like species-specific people. There's the herpers, and then there's the entomologists who are a little less. The entomologists are more cognitively flexible than the herpetologist people, in my experience. I'm saying that out loud. Yes, I am. It's a balancing act, right? Like, my theme has been when I do public presentations, I'm doing the best I can for as many as possible. And sometimes there are losers and sometimes there are winners. But if we don't put fire through there, everything's a loser. Those animals aren't going to have their habitat. The plants aren't going to regenerate. They're going to be shaded and squashed out by everything. So
I think one thing with that too is, like, you were talking about choosing sites. When we choose a site, we're also trying to not burn necessarily, depending on what our management goals are, more than a third of that analog habitat at once. So we're leaving refugia, or leaving refuge for critters to go to, or trying to put fire on the ground slower so that I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, more of a gentle fire, if you will, because not everything can fly away. And one thing we've seen too is some of these older critters, box turtles, will sense cues of smoke and fire, and they will retreat to safety zones a lot of the time if the fire is done and operated in a way that keeps all these critters in mind. And so the check boxes, like, we're not just going through check boxes on our burn plan of weather and this and this and this, all these operational things. We're looking at what species are we, not trying to keep one species in mind, but okay, I have these 2 federally listed species or 3 federally listed species that I have to think about, but also there's these 100 other things that I have to think about as well, and how do I implement this where we can have the best outcome for our management goals.
We could be here all night.
Yeah.
I think that, every question you have, right, has several different answers, and a lot of them are, it depends with that. And I think, largely the primary goal of the fire council being there, well, number one, I wouldn't be burning without Michele, and there's an introduction to that space. For me, it was going through, environmental degree, geography degree, getting a job at the Nature Center, and asking if I wouldn't mind being on a fire, which just kind of exploded my world and the possibilities of my relationship changed and got deeper with that too. You never know when that's going to happen for someone in that space, and there's how many late night and extended conversations we can have. Fire council's there to help kind of guide people through that, being able to ask those questions about getting there safely, and then showing people the path that might work for them to get to their fire dreams.
During our burn week in September, the previous Grand Valley State University 130, 190 class, which is the basic firefighter training course, there was a student who was in there who got the message that we were doing this, and he messaged me. He's like, "Can I come to burn week?" He skipped class, but he's in that degree.
Permission.
He got permission from his professors to skip class, and that young man was lit, literally, except for not on fire, right? But he was so excited about what we were doing and how it works, and it's been my pleasure over my 22 years in this business of seeing so many people grow up. And that your predecessor in his position is in Washington, D.C., burning in the middle of Washington, D.C., right? Yes, it's very exciting to see people get the bug and continue the tradition and the practice.
Well, playing off the comment that we could be here all night, I think we are actually approaching the where we wanted to wrap. This is midwinter. If people are interested in learning more about what you're doing, preparing their land for fire, what's coming up that you're doing that people might be able to catch up with you?
Well, Michigan Prescribed Fire Council has its annual meeting and annual conference February 10th and 11th, shameless plug, at Fort Custer Training Center. And that is, one, it's a good time. 2, the sessions are going to be great. It's
Change.
Yep. Yeah. Change is the
Overarching theme.
Thank you. The theme. That's the word I was not finding. And a private landowner can be immersed in a room with professional practitioners, agency, non-agency, people who've been burning for 20 or more years, and people who are just fresh in it. So it's a really interesting gambit of people in the room. And it doesn't take long talking to a prescribed fire practitioner to get us to turn your ear a little bit about fire. We will keep going about it.
We'll be doing a S-130, 190 field day relatively soon, in March-ish, I think. And those are open to the public, so if you want to get in and start learning the basics of wildland fire, everybody who does that with us at least has to have those basic courses. It teaches you what the tools are and what the protective gear is and how fire kind of works. And yeah, that's always open to the public. It's relatively
So that would be
inexpensive.
the kind of training course somebody take if they wanted to volunteer to help out.
Correct.
Yep. Yep. And there's, it's firecouncil.org is our website, because we were the second fire council in the country to be founded. So we got lucky and got that URL first. And so all of our stuff is listed on that site.
Yeah, and mentioned volunteering. The Nature Center has a volunteer program for fire. Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy has the same thing with Fort Custer, and getting on that firecouncil.org There's a bunch of information on there, updates on when trainings happen and different events are happening. And
All right, cool. Thank you.
Sweet.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.